as a student during my graduate training in the neurosciences, I became a materialist scientist, as all the information that I studied pointed to the brain being the sole producer of conscious reality. So like most other graduates in neuroscience. But then when I was a young neuroscience professor, I had a profound spiritual awakening during a meditation retreat, which truly transformed my worldview and my life. And I didn't know how to integrate those two parts of my life. So I basically led two separate lives, the neuroscience professor in rehabilitation medicine and the spiritual seeker. In private conversations with some of my colleagues around the world, I discovered that they were doing the same thing in their lives. They were keeping this important element in their lives very private because they feared a loss of their scientific credibility if they shared it. So I wondered how many other scientists and academics have the same experience and quandary. And when I was given the opportunity to propose the topic for this volume, I knew immediately what I wanted to do. I wanted to ask scientists and academics from around the world who had experienced a spiritually transformative awakening to tell us about it, and then describe their own transformation and the challenges they faced in integrating it into their career and their lives. So I wanted to invite them to share these previously private, profound awakenings and transformations with the rest of the world. In this volume, we went to both scientists and other academics, typically with PhDs or other doctoral degrees, and let them share their experience of their own spiritual journey. This includes a description of their spiritually transformative experience, then the subsequent transformation, which included both an inner change, for example, their worldview, their values, and their beliefs, and their outer changes, for example, how this experience manifested in their day-to-day life. Finally, the authors discuss the challenges to their credibility in academia and the scientific field if they share those experiences publicly, requiring them to live what we call a divided life between the personal and the professional. And in fact, this fear of losing their credibility with their professional colleagues was the reason that 3 of our authors chose to submit their essays anonymously. As I read each essay that was submitted, I was profoundly moved by not only the experiences that the academics related, but the amazing transformational effects on their worldviews and their careers.
Thank you, Marjorie. I think your point about anonymity is very significant. It kind of proves the point of how hard it is to come out, especially when you haven't got a tenured post. And we found that a number of the authors, quite prominent authors, were writing about these experiences for the first time. And so they were, quote, coming out. And we think that there are, in fact, a lot of academics and scientists who just need permission to do this. And this could have a transformative effect on the scientific worldview.
So I think you're right. Yes, and I think what was interesting is that it almost helped that they were in a cadre of colleagues that were also doing the same thing. So they felt that they had some support in that way. And what I want to do is actually just give you part of the essay of one author, just a little bit of an excerpt from it that talks about this. She'd already left academia for the most part, she said in her essay. And she said, it was quite hard to discuss these matters with my fellow peers at the time of that awakening. Whenever I tried, she said, I experienced a resistance to this idea and indeed sometimes hostility. She said, I often refer to this experience as epistemological discrimination. In an era where we all acknowledge the importance of endorsing diversity and difference, for instance, on matters of gender and race and sexual preference, there are still residual barriers to showing the same spirit of openness to alternative ontological worldviews and epistemological possibilities. She says, for that reason, the focus of my career took a big shift, which initially was quite hard for me, given how devoted I was to the idea of seeking tenure and a long-term career as a professor at a university. However, she said, in this new light, that prospect felt restrictive and no longer true to the way I now experienced life and knowledge and wished to explore it with others. She said, therefore, I created a school in Athens where philosophy is open to all and can be learned, taught, and practiced in a more lived and experiential way, which she couldn't do in the university. So that is Athena, again, one of our steering group in our Galileo Commission. Now, in our Galileo Summit celebrating that book's publication that David was just mentioning, I thought it was impressive that a number of the authors noted exactly these sentiments about their careers. And I also want to mention, as David said, it was well attended by the public, our summit. And in fact, I think 430 people were actually registered for it, many of which will be hearing the recording. But we were impressed with that enthusiasm.
Yes, thank you, Marjorie. I also add that earlier in the year, Athena created a call for a renaissance of the spirit in the humanities, which was a short manifesto, or a call rather than a manifesto, which we're inviting people to support on the website. And we've got some very significant support from the likes of Professor Keith Ward from Oxford and the famous author, Dr. Ian McGilchrist. Marjorie, you also written a scientific article that's recently been published in Explore about the quantitative data on these awakenings and transformations in scientists. And perhaps you can say something about the results which you analyze in that article.
Yes, at first I want to say the reason that I decided we should take the data from those essays and actually create a questionnaire and do a quantitative analysis is that everybody wants to see peer-reviewed scientific research about these things. And so I submitted it to Explore, and now it is out there in that journal. So first of all, in terms of the nature of the experience of all of these people, 68% reported a mystical component to their experience. And regarding the life transformations, many reported a change in career, like Athena, and 57 reported a change in the way they approached their existing career. One person shared, "My spiritual transformation soon began to make me calmer and happier and to give me more equanimity, all of which was invaluable in interacting with my colleagues and my students." And I certainly noticed that myself. And regarding values and behavioral changes, more than 80% of our participants noticed an increase in their desire to serve others, a decrease in their stress, and a decrease in their fear of death from those experiences. And one of the questions we explored in more detail in this publication concerned barriers these scientists and academics might have encountered to sharing their experiences with others. And of those who decided not to share it with their colleagues, 48% said it was because their colleagues would not understand, and 19% said it was because of fear they would be ridiculed. And here are just a few of the comments of those scientists and academics. One said, "I knew that my colleagues would subscribe to the mainstream orthodoxy and dismiss all this as either psychotic events or illusions." He said, "Most of my colleagues fear that if they admit extraordinary events such as telepathy, psychokinesis, or clairvoyance, they open the door to superstition and charlatans. So they defend the existing scientific rationale." He says, "I've also been in trouble," in quotes, "several times institutionally and have been declined to participate in conferences or just shut out of committees because some colleagues had raised concerns about my ideology." And then another one said, "At first, I wanted to tell everybody, but I quickly learned it needed to be protected. Part of it was that others wouldn't understand and would change their perspective of me negatively or in ways that would be confining. More important was that I recognized that I became aware of when sharing the experience would be beneficial and expansive for myself and the person I was sharing it with, and when not." So in concluding, I think the bottom line of our results of the publication is that as its authors, we're asking for a shift in our scientific colleagues' approach to these phenomena. We're asking them to be curious about examining the data from what we call the first person or subjective experiences in their exploration of the nature of reality, in addition to that of the third person or objective data, which is what we usually examine in the laboratory, what we call that both and approach. And I think what I want to mention is what we're simply asking for is that our scientific worldview simply expand a little bit to include what we would call a post-materialist perspective. And we believe that If we do this, then we can begin to understand more about the possibility that consciousness might be fundamental. And our goal is to encourage students and young researchers to continue that exploration so that science may move forward.
Thanks very much, Marjorie. I think it's worth just mentioning, I know we're beginning to run up to the hour, this new article in Frontiers in Psychology by Helani and Dean Radin.
Definitely. And I just should mention the title is What if Consciousness is Not an Emergent Property of the Brain? Observation and Empirical Challenges to Materialist Models. And they have actually gotten it published in a mainstream journal. And I think that tells us that people are beginning to be open to publishing these articles as long as we make them very empirical and observational. I think that's the key issue.